record this computer. Hello, this is Jeremy Griffin with the New York City Hemophilia chapter. I've got some amazing guests today. This is our session on how to get a job as a video game designer. Whenever I talked to one of our staff members about their family, they said, you know what? My family does video game design at a very high level. And I was like, are you serious? Would they come and speak to us? She said, sure. And we're very lucky today to have both Stephen and Taylor to talk with us. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into video games. Stephen, you're up first.
Okay, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me. Well, I got started in video games, boy, it's been over 40 years ago now. I started on something called the Apple II computer, which was kind of a toy, but at the time it was actually one of the first microcomputers that you could purchase. And I was working on a baseball game for that called Micro League Baseball, and that came out in 1984, around the same time as the Apple 1984 Macintosh ad. I don't know if anybody will remember that or be familiar with that, but it was a big thing about how Apple was going to change the world, and to a large extent they have.
I'm going to pause you there, just because I know some people have been paying attention. Fortnite just came out with a redo of that, and so yeah. As you're introing yourself, I'd love to hear your comment on that too. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Some backstory on that. Apple Computer has what they call the App Store, which is for all iOS devices, and they have kind of a stranglehold on that market in that they approve or disapprove anything that goes onto iOS devices. And along the way, they charge 30% of anything that anybody sells on that platform. So it's a pretty sizable amount. And it's one of their largest sources of revenue. Well, Fortnite intentionally, it looks like, broke their terms of service and allowed people to pay directly to Fortnite when they were purchasing something. And because of that, Apple and also Google Play banned Fortnite from iOS and Android devices. So I believe lawsuits are happening back and forth now, and
a lot of angry kids too. I mean, like all these people watching are mad; they can't get it anymore.
Yeah, not on their mobile devices.
That might be part of it. Honestly, they might have wanted that to happen and get their community rallied behind this movement.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And Fortnite, so they are setting up their own app store that's going to compete with Apple and everybody else, and they're charging a much lower price. So it's interesting. But to get back to your original point, they came out with kind of a parody of that original 1984 ad, casting Apple now as the big bad large company that's suppressing things, and Fortnite is the one who's coming along and trying to free everybody else. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But it's a really fascinating time.
I took you way off the intro place. You were back in 1984 when you were first starting out. I'm going to go back to that. Why don't you go back to that intro?
Yeah, actually, let me step back just a little bit beyond that. I was very lucky. There weren't a lot of microcomputers when I first started. And because my father taught at the University of Delaware, Delaware had mainframes, which were these large computer systems that took up rooms and had to be air conditioned and all of this stuff. And because my father was on the faculty, I was allowed to have access to these mainframes. And that's where I first started programming. There were terminals throughout the university. And you would go and sit at a terminal, and it was connected to the mainframe, and it would do something called time sharing, which means each terminal would get a little slice of time where you would interact with the main computer, with the mainframe. And it was kind of invisible to you when you were using it. It seemed like you were constantly going back and forth, but it would split up its time and service everybody who was using it. And because of that, I learned to program. I realized how much I enjoyed it. A few years later, when the microcomputers came out, I got an Atari 800 was my first computer, and my first job was on the Apple II. And I just continued with that, and I've been programming ever since. I mentioned Micro League Sports, or Micro League Baseball. I did a program, the first version of Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, and we did that back in 1987, and they've done 20 or so versions since then, or more.
I learned on that. Thank you. It was very good.
Is that right? That's too funny.
I still remember it.
I did the Apple II version of that when we were for the first iteration. I've worked for Electronic Arts and Activision. I've been very fortunate to have been able to work with a lot of these large companies. I've worked remotely almost my entire career, so this whole working from home thing isn't anything new for me. It was an easy transition. I know other people are adjusting to it, but I've been doing it for a long time, which has been really nice. So yeah, and I've enjoyed it the whole time. I get up in the morning, I look forward to what I'm going to do for the day, and it's been great. I highly recommend it.
All right, before we go to Taylor with her background, I'm going to, put a pin on this for you. Not of the ones you've designed, but of the ones you've played. What's your favorite video game you've ever played?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many different. I like puzzle games. I like all kinds of different. I mean, I like sort of like first-person shooters, but I like the exploration aspect of that more than I do the shooting aspect of it. So it's depending on what genre. But one of my favorite games actually was on the old NES. A game called The Adventures of Lolo, and it was this puzzle game. It was really simple, 8-bit graphics. There wasn't much to it, but it was really challenging, and you had to figure out how to move things around the room so that you wouldn't fall into something or get shot by something, and make your way through this whole maze. And it was just room after room of this puzzle that you had to figure out. I really enjoyed playing that.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Thanks for that story. I'm really excited about digging in on this. And I'm sure everyone else is too. So as a reminder, one of the things for anyone who's watching this later, this is our back to school event. And this is dedicated to people with bleeding disorders trying to figure out, how do we take advantage of the things we want to do? How do we make possibilities happen? And the idea of getting a job in this setting in a video game might be something that'd be really, really interesting to people. Taylor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right. So I recently graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology with a degree in game design development. I started off as in diapers. I was playing games on like the GameCube. I had a Game Boy Advance, playing Pokemon, and pretty much ever since I was little, I've been playing games. In high school, I wanted to learn more about creating games, but I didn't know how to code yet. So a resource that I found was really helpful was Minecraft. I created my own Minecraft server, and that allowed me to change the game using plugins and alter the game to be a game within a game. So that was kind of my introduction into game design and development, and I learned so much. And it was cool because I actually found a way to monetize it a little bit and help pay for the costs and make a little bit of money as well, selling in-game content. And that was really well received by the players, which I was thrilled about because I really loved creating a community of bringing together people using video games. So I love that. That's something that I would recommend people could start in game design as well, as toy around in Minecraft. It's a really great tool to use, and a lot of people have it and play it. So it's already something that's familiar to people. So moving on from that, I took some classes in high school. I learned Java, the programming language, in a computer science class. And then I decided I wanted this to be my career. So I applied and got into Rochester Institute of Technology, where I further learned more programming languages. It helped me be in a scenario that I could easily collaborate with people, i.e., through group projects and that sort of thing, as well as like meeting people who are interested in the same thing, game design development. And from there, I recently landed a position at Rockstar Games.
You're a rock star. That's awesome.
Rockstar Games, and they're most famous for their Grand Theft Auto games as well as Red Dead Redemption. And I will be a game designer working on missions within Grand Theft Auto. And I'm thrilled about that. I'm actually in the middle of moving. You can see my suitcases, I'm sorry. But I'm thrilled. I'm moving to San Diego in a few days. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I mean, as I was saying before, one of the things that I can't tell whenever I'm talking, guys, does my video come up on your end or does it stay on you?
It does.
Okay. It's interesting. On mine, it doesn't. So I'm just going to spotlight for a second. But one of the things I've always been interested in is with people with bleeding disorders. They typically don't do as many sports because there's limitations and there's maybe some fears by their parents on whether they can do certain things or not. And so I've always been interested in exposing folks to other opportunities, whether it be arts or coding or that sort of thing. And the idea of possibilities versus limitations seems to also play into the role of game design in general. We were talking about puzzle games, and we were talking about the possibilities in Minecraft. Could you guys talk about that as a programmer? What do possibilities look like in game design?
Sure.
I can start, and Tay, you can probably take it to a much higher degree, being more on the design side. But one of the things that I got started with, or one of the reasons I got started with programming, is because I didn't have somebody who would play some of these games that I wanted to play against. And I know that sounds really sad, but I probably could have found people. No, stop. I probably could have found people, but I was really interested in programming. I thought, hey, what a cool thing to take this game and code it so that I could play against the computer.
That's cool.
And it was I have it up on my shelf here, a game called Black Box. That's an 8x8 grid. And one person puts marbles in the grid, and then without telling the other person, and then the other person it's shooting rays into the side, and by where they go in and where they come out, you can figure out the location of these marbles. And that was one of the first things I coded, and that got me a job at the University of Delaware as a part-time programmer, and I just went on from there. But it's really interesting. You can do all kinds of things, and it leads to, like, back in the day, we didn't have, the internet that we have today. We didn't have interterminal games as much. Some of the mainframes at the university had that, but you couldn't really play games against other people in the same way that you can today. So that's a really neat part of games and programming, and especially in today's environment where we have, COVID-19 and that sort of thing, and people are being as careful as they can be. It gives you the ability to interact with your friends, play games with your friends, and do that sort of thing while still being safe and not taking risks that you don't need to take.
Yeah, that's huge.
Tay, why don't you
I love that. I want Taylor to comment, but one of the things that struck me is, like, it's almost like the possibility you created was just to have a friend. Like, in some senses.
I know, like, that sounds sad, doesn't it?
That's cool. Like, you were solving a real problem. I love that about programming. You look at it and you go, I want to play that game, but I don't have someone here to. And we're all in a real problem right now that we have to solve with COVID and things like that. Taylor, go ahead. I'd love to hear your input on this.
Absolutely. So possibilities versus limitations. So the cool thing was that when I was learning to code and design is that, like, anything you can think of just about, you can create a software or a game for it. For example, I love to play Truth or Dare with my friends at school, and I was looking through the App Store and I couldn't find any app that I really liked or that had the features I wanted. So I created my own. And I added custom features that I wanted and that sort of thing. And that was the game that we used. It was really cool because in creating that game, I learned a lot about the process of creating a game from concept to ship title. And I put it out on the App Store, which is another thing that you can put on your resume. And I'm sure that helped me get my job at Rockstar. But any software or any game that's within reason of scope that you want to make, you can. And I thought that was the coolest thing, getting into development, just to be able to solve problems like that.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's awesome. And I'm going to push you a little bit more on the thought of limitations or possibilities. Like, whenever you see as a programmer limitations, I don't know if it's like when you're finding a bug in software or if maybe it's a language limitation or something like that. How do you approach those things as a programmer?
Sure. Programming is the reason why I like design and development is because programming is very logical, and design is very creative, and I like the mesh of the two, and that's why I didn't really go into software engineering specifically or graphic design, that sort of thing, is because I like the mesh. And I think that being able to do either or both helps with those limitations. I would say limitations in terms of game design, I'd probably say, like, if you're looking to create a larger game, you do need more people to work on the game. And that's also really cool to be able to collaborate with people, and to be able to work with people to create this bigger project, this thing that's bigger than just one person.
Let's see. Great. I want to like take it back to the root on this. There are a lot of people listening right now, and they maybe have never done this before. So take me to base one. Where does someone get started? You know, let's say they're in junior high or they're in high school, and they're going, you know what? I love playing games. I'd love to explore this. Where would you point them to, resource-wise or whatever?
Sure.
There's a couple things. One of the things, there's a lot of things that are available for free on the internet. You know, you're going to need to have a personal computer probably in order to do some of this stuff. A lot of libraries and things have computers that you can use that are available. But it's really helpful if you have a computer. A lot of families have them now. And especially with everything going on, it's helpful having a computer with a webcam and that kind of stuff. You can keep in touch with people. But there's one of the, a really good tool that's out there is something called Visual Studio, and you can get a copy of that for free. You can download it. Afterwards, I'll send you some links, and we can post some links or something like that, in case people are interested in exploring some of these tools or downloading them and taking them out for a test drive. There's also something that we actually use for development of games called Unity. And then one of the neat things about Unity is you can write the code once, and then you can build that code onto a bunch of different platforms. For example, I'm currently the technical lead for R.B.I. baseball for Major League Baseball. And we're developing it right now for Xbox One, PlayStation 4, the Nintendo Switch, iOS and Android. And we have one common code base that we write the game for, and then you can build it for each of those platforms and distribute it on the different platforms. There's some work that goes into making it specific to the platform. Like, for example, on iOS, you just have a touch screen, you don't have a joystick, so the input is going to be different. But you can kind of separate those parts of the code and handle it independently on each platform. But it's really nice that allows you to use, you can write the game once and then debug it, and you have it across all these different platforms. And there was something else, Tay, you were talking about a website that really helps with introduction to programming.
Sure. There's a lot of good resources out there for free. If you don't know how to code yet, there's a few things that you can do without having to learn how to code that can teach you the concepts. For example, Google for Education has a lot of good resources that are free that can teach people how to code conceptually before even learning all of the syntax and like all of the specifics, which will be good to break that barrier of entry. And then once you want to learn how to code and you're feeling comfortable, or you just want to dive right into coding, there's a good resource called Code Academy, which is free. It has an option you can pay for more like quizzes and that sort of thing, more like extensive stuff, but the free version is very accessible, very good. I've used it myself actually in some of my classes. So Code Academy, Google for Education, also some free resources. Unity is good for creating games in development. And then there's also Visual Studios. So you're going to code in Visual Studios, and then you're going to connect everything essentially in Unity. And then if you like to create graphics or what they're called assets in game design, GIMP, GIMP, is a really good free resource to create. It's like a more in-depth version of Paint. Paint is scratching the surface. GIMP has so many features, and you can just play around with that, create art for your games. So I would recommend all of those. Those are some really good resources that are all free, and they could definitely get you get the ball rolling in terms of game design development.
You know, one of the things that I always find interesting whenever you're looking at maybe a new career path or whatever, or you're moving into career path, is the number of people who are involved in this stuff, right? So
Oh yeah.
it's usually a huge team. So like someone as a game player, I look at it and I go, oh my gosh, like what, did one guy sit and do this in his basement or whatever? And it's not. It's like this huge industry. So can you guys talk to me a little bit about the types of people that work on games and the types of roles that are involved in the gaming industry?
Yeah. On our team, we have a bunch of different people, a lot of engineers, who are engineers are programmers basically. And a lot of times we'll take the game and we'll divide it up into different parts. And each engineer can focus on different parts. We have an engineer who does like the introduction, the intro screens, the UI, which is user interface, which means like the menus and things like that you go through to select options before you're starting a game. We have artists that create the assets, like Taylor was talking about, the different graphics that we use that you see on the screen. You know, when you bring up, you know, you select, you want to play a game and you're selecting different teams that you're going to play with, and it'll show you an example of the jerseys and the player wearing the jersey as you scroll through the teams. They create all of that. There's two-dimensional and three-dimensional assets. 2D assets are the flat backgrounds on the screens and things. 3D assets would be like the players, the animations that go along with that. Yeah, 3D models. The batters, you know, the fielders, all the animations that they go through. There are musicians who come up with the audio content, and they'll do sound effects and music and all that kind of stuff. There are producers who are usually kind of the manager of the team. They'll set the priorities. They'll decide what direction the design is going to go in to a large degree. We have designers, obviously, who are creating the design. A lot of times the producer will say, we want to go in one direction or the other. Sometimes the designer is the one who makes that choice. It just depends on how the team is structured.
Something that I like to say to people who don't know a lot about the industry is every single thing that you see in a video game had to be created by somebody. Every single thing, down to the menus, all the art, all of the models that you see, all the textures on the walls, even like the mechanics, the rules for the game. Every single thing had to be created, and each person on a team has a specific job to creating each thing. So like you said, artists, programmers, producers are kind of like the managers of the project, animators, 2D and 2D artists, which is like graphic design, that sort of thing, 3D modelers, even the movement in the game had to be made. Every single thing you see had to be created and programmed by someone. And that's why these massive games require such a large team, is because one person, even to create one character, it has to be designed by somebody first, then it has to be 3D modeled, and then it has to be textured, meaning like colored, drawn, like, yeah. And then it has to be animated, so the movement has to be done, and then it has to be implemented into the game in a way where it won't break the game, or it functions properly for what it needs to do. And each person has a different role in that whole process, and that's just for one character. So that's why you require such a large team to create these games. It's because it's a whole, everyone specializes in a different thing. And that's why the game industry is so amazing, is because there's so many different parts of it. And if there's not one part, so if you want to go into 3D modeling, for example, there's a role for you in game design. Or if you want to just do programming, there's a role for you. That's why it's such a cool industry, is because there's so many different people from so many different walks of life as well.
I agree. And I think, you know, specifically as much as, you know, video games have grown, it's important for people to know that, you know, not everyone who works in video games is a programmer. So that may be some people's routes, but it's not always everyone's routes. I want to ask you guys this. So obviously some of these games have giant teams, but again, with kids out there trying to get started, I like the idea of the lowest viable product too.
Sure.
You know, Taylor, you were talking about Minecraft. Stephen, you were talking about this game that you developed early on. Maybe you guys could both talk me through an example that was a small team. Maybe it's you and another person or whatever that you worked on to give some people an idea of what was the start to finish of that.
Sure. Dad, you want to start?
Yeah, for example, I worked for a small startup company called Micro League Baseball, and there were basically 3 programmers, and one of the programmers also did the artwork and generated the music and that sort of thing. It was started, pardon me, by a professor at the University of Delaware who was, his focus was statistics. So he did, it was kind of, there's something called Stratomatic, which is a baseball game where you basically roll the dice and you figure out based on odds and people's performance, what the outcome of the play is. And that's what this game was on the Apple II. So we had a small team, bunch of people were wearing a bunch of different hats. So they were doing multiple jobs that would normally be split up on a larger team. And you could do that back then a little easier than you can today. The requirements weren't nearly as high. You know, the displays were small, the animations were tiny. There wasn't a lot of resolution. So you weren't texture mapping things. You were just trying to come up with pixels that looked like a player running across the screen. But that was a good example of a small team starting. One of the things that exists today is there are a lot of indie teams, which are independent developers. And those teams are just a collection of people who are usually get together and work together with the idea of they will put their game out and sell it, and they'll hopefully make some money once the game is released. So they're doing it in their spare time, kind of, or maybe even full time, but don't really get the payback until the game is released, and then they can start selling it and making some money. So that's an option if you're trying to get started, but you don't have, you know, the abilities to do music or art or whatever. If you like programming, or you're an artist and you're not great at coding, finding somebody else who can handle that aspect of it, and forming a small team. And, you know, that's where, you know, companies end up getting started from, you know, a good idea and a couple of talented people.
That's great. Taylor, what about you?
Sure. To build on to the last part of that, since there are so many different roles in a project, and if you can't find someone else who will fill those roles, there's a lot of free resources online. For example, royalty-free music, for example, if you want to get music for your game, that sort of thing. There's also something called an asset store, which you can purchase for money, or there's some free resources on there as well to kind of fill those needs for your game if you can't find somebody to collaborate with. But I would probably...
Talk about this asset store. Like, are there lots of these? I don't know anything about this.
Sure. So with Unity, one of the programs we were talking about, there's a store where people can submit their assets. Sometimes it's 3D models, sometimes it's textures, sometimes it's music, for example, and set a price. Unity takes a chunk of whatever they make, but it's like a marketplace for game designers to purchase things they need for their game, which is really cool, and it's a great resource. And it helps a lot of game designers with their games who can't find or don't have the resources to hire someone else to do that work to complete their game.
That's a really good point, Taylor. I'd forgotten to mention the asset store when I was talking about Unity, but it's good on in a couple of respects. One is, as Taylor said, there's a lot of free stuff on there that you can use for your game, or there's other stuff that's pretty inexpensively priced that you can take, and that way you don't have to. There's also code. It's not just graphics and music. There are examples of code on the asset store that you can download and use legally in your game, and that'll save you the time of having to reinvent the wheel. The other thing that's really cool about the asset store is it can be a way of getting started with programming. You can create these assets without having to create the whole game, like a character or a graphic or whatever it is that you want, and you can put it on the asset store, and you can sell some of those and maybe make some money and continue. There are companies that have gotten started that way and have gotten really large by supporting Unity and people developing games for Unity.
Man, now I'm thinking I should make an asset of myself, like a little image of my like face and stuff. I think it would sell, right? Don't you?
For sure.
Yeah, it'd be easy to do.
Taylor, I'm going to go back to you because I interrupted you while you were talking through this
No
idea of the
worries.
lowest viable product kind of thing, and like a small team or a small project you've worked on. Go ahead.
Sure. So I would probably go with the Minecraft server that I created. I created it with my little sister. She helped a lot with the design because she knew more about the type of game I was going for within Minecraft than I did. But I mostly did all of the plugins, which are basically the modifications that you install into Minecraft to change how the game works. And that's how you can create a game within a game. There's a lot of servers that are really cool that people create entire mini games for. They just that a lot of people go on, that a lot of people watching this might be familiar with, like Mineplex, for example. They're a very well-known server, and they basically have a bunch of different mini games that people can join the server and go on and play with their friends. And that's kind of the thing I wanted to go for, is to create a game of my own and create this community. And it was a lot easier than I thought it'd be. YouTube is a great resource as well for learning how to do these sorts of things, tutorials. There's a lot of really good free information out there, especially on YouTube. And that's how I learned. And I created a whole Minecraft server and community pretty much by myself, but also with the help of my little sister. So it's absolutely possible to do, and absolutely doable for one person to create, or one or two people to create a whole game like that. It's definitely easier doing it through Minecraft though, because there's this code in this game already there. I kind of just modified it, which made it very easy, and it was very easy to do, to modify Minecraft. And that's why I chose Minecraft to do this, to start this sort of thing.
I love whenever I'm in one of these interviews and I know that I'm going to ask a question that is not going to make any sense, and everyone watching is going to be like, duh, we all know about this stuff. But I'm super interested in this idea of this Minecraft server. Can you talk to me a little bit
Sure.
more about the specific one you made? How many sub games did you create? Like, what was the uptake? Let's dig into this a little bit.
Sure. So this Minecraft server that I created, I wanted to do my own take on this sub game within Minecraft called a prison server. So what it is there's different levels that the player can get to. They start at the lowest level, and it's this little block of blocks they can mine. So players will mine the blocks, and then they'll sell the blocks that they mine to make enough money to rank up to the next level, essentially. And it's a little more complicated than that. I'm simplifying it a lot, but that's the gist of it. And I wanted to do my own take on
Thank you
it.
for simplifying it for me. Everyone else knows it's complicated.
No,
For me,
it's okay.
I appreciate it.
It's all good. Yeah, so I wanted to do my own take on that, and create some mini games within the server as well for people who wanted a break from doing that. For example, like little parkour areas where people can test their movement skills, and stuff like that. PvP, there's also a PvP arena that people can test their fighting skills in.
Player versus player.
Yeah, player versus player. So like they can fight each other and see who wins, essentially. So I really just wanted to create a cool place for people to come and hang out at, a fun game. I really wanted to test my ability to make a game that was fun and that people wanted to play, and at the same time learn how to program and modify a game in that way.
That's awesome. Were you able to monetize that game in any way, or was it more about proof of concept and community building?
Well, initially, I didn't make it to make money, but it was cool that it kind of turned into that. I was able to create a way to sell in-game content to players, and players actually really enjoyed that, to my surprise. And they purchased a lot of that in-game content, and it helped pay for, I was at the time paying for the server to be run. You can set up a server on your computer, but I was paying for it to be run through another company, and it was actually covering the costs of doing that, which was really cool. And I was also making some money on top of that. So that was really neat. That was never my goal, but it was really cool that it turned into that.
I love the idea of how you mentioned when you did it, it kind of built this sense of community. Our organization's mission is to build community to improve health outcomes. And so I feel like it sort of relates in that sense. And I also think about, here we are in COVID, right? Like we're all sitting at home, isolated or whatever, and video games seem to be able to pull us together in new ways. Are there existing communities? So like Minecraft's an example. It's an existing community that people are already involved in that they could leverage to do some, early programming things. Are there other existing games that happens in? I don't know enough about like Roblox or Animal Crossing or things like that. Are there other games that are like that allow for that?
That allow community?
Oh, the variation of building your own in-game version.
Experience.
So,
Sure.
and community. I feel like I'm kind of doing two things at once. One, I think that these games already have their community, but they may also allow for gaming.
Sure. That's also why I chose Minecraft, is because it's so versatile. There's so much you can do with the game, and there's so much creativity that happens within the game. It's what's called a sandbox game, which means you can pretty much do whatever you want within the bounds of the game. And I thought that was really cool, and that's part of the reason why I chose it, because you can do pretty much whatever you want. And there's a bunch of different servers and communities within Minecraft that you could probably find for just about anything. And in terms of modifying other games, there's a bunch of other games on a platform called Steam, which you need a PC for, that you can modify and create these games within games. For example, the one that's coming to mind right now is called Jerry's Mod, and it's basically a platform that people use to create their own games within. It gives people assets and the ability to create rules, and people use that to create their own games. And it's a really cool place to go to get inspiration for new games, as well as just to have fun with other people.
So if someone's looking that up, it's on Steam. It's called Jerry's Mod.
Yeah.
Mods, Jerry, Jerry.
I believe so. I don't have.
Oh, you know what? You guys send me some links afterwards. Also, it's a good time to let people know that if you have questions, you can be putting them into the chat off to the side. We'll send it to everybody afterwards. They're going to take time to give us some answers. Also, we have an email address set up if you're watching this somewhere else, questions@nyhemophilia.org. Send them to us, and we'll get you the answers back. Go ahead, Taylor. I'll go back to you.
I just want to say I misspoke. It's not Jerry's Mod, it's Gary's Mod. That was my mistake.
See? It's a good thing I asked. Everyone's typing in Gary's Mods. They're all mad.
So it's Gary's Mod, Garry.
Okay.
Mod. Yeah. It's really cool. And that's also a good way you can create your own games within. Yeah, but I would highly recommend Minecraft just because it's so user friendly, and you don't need to know a whole lot about programming to get started. And I would say it's a widely popular game as well, so many people probably know about it and the rules within the game as well.
I'm gonna go back to Stephen for a second, and
Sure.
Here's a question for you. Back to the sense of community. How important has your community, your network of people, been to your success in the gaming field?
It's been pretty important. I was sort of lucky in a couple of situations. Didn't seem lucky at the time, but I was working for big companies that ended up going bankrupt. one of which was actually Activision, which is now Activision Blizzard and the largest video game company in the world. But back in 1989, they were having some financial troubles and they went through a reorganization. They went bankrupt, let most of the people go, but all of those people went to all these different companies throughout the industry. So it was sort of fortunate for me in that I had contacts now at all these different companies. And that helped me to move on to different jobs when I needed to. A similar thing happened here on Long Island when I was working for a company called Acclaim. And I worked for them for a while, and then after several years, they went bankrupt. I'm hoping I wasn't the cause of these bankruptcies, but
You're the
I
common
don't think I was.
denominator. No.
Yeah. But then those people went to other companies and so forth, and it was helpful for me to know different people at different companies. But there's also, things like the website LinkedIn is pretty useful in terms of making connections. If you know anybody in the industry, you can connect with them, and then they have other connections in the industry and that sort of thing. Maybe in the beginning, just to ask questions or to find out, what are good things to do if you're interested in getting into the industry. Something Taylor mentioned was that she had created an app for the iPhone. And I think you've put it on Android now as well, right, Tay?
I uploaded it. It has to go through the process of approval
Right.
and all that. But yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. So coming up with something that you can put together in terms of a portfolio as like an example project or a small game. It doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering, but just something to give an idea of what it is that you're interested in and what you're capable of doing. And as you go forward, and you get more skills and abilities, you can make more complicated, somewhat more involved games and things like that, and just show your progression that way. So something like LinkedIn is really useful in terms of a community and making connections and stuff like that on a professional level.
Yeah.
What about you, Taylor? As far as like the community of gamers or the people you've known, obviously, I think you probably had a little bit of leg up having, in your household, someone who knew the game industry. But how important is that network of folks in gaming been to you?
Oh, it's great. Going to a school for game design development was really cool because I got to meet a bunch of people in the same major who are also going out and going to a bunch of different companies. But it was really cool because going to school for game design development, it put me in situations like group projects where you had to collaborate with other people, and learning those skills was really important and a lot of fun to work with other people who had similar interests. And keeping in touch, I'm friends with a lot of them, but LinkedIn is a good place to keep in touch with them as well professionally. It's always good to know people from different companies in different parts of the industry. Just to diversify your perspective and to have different people you can reach out to for different things. It's
That's
always
great.
nice.
I'm going to follow up on the LinkedIn thing for a second.
Sure.
And either one of you can answer. I think both of you have a perspective on it. So if someone's reaching out to someone, maybe it's someone they don't know, but they're looking for, maybe an entry point or whatever, what do you like to see in that sort of thing? So Stephen, I'll ask it to you first. Like if someone's like just, an early entry, like wanting to get to know you or, pick your brain about something, a mentor-mentee relationship, what kind of things do you look for? What works, what doesn't?
It's helpful to know what they're interested in, what path they're looking to follow, what kind of things they want to do. As Taylor was talking about, and I mentioned, there's a lot of different things you can be doing in the game industry. Some of those things I'll be helpful for, some of those things not as much. But like if it was design, probably be something I might hand off to Taylor if she felt like talking to, or was able to, had the time to help out. I'd be more on the programming side and that sort of thing. But it's always good to know, what somebody's experience is, kind of where they are at, what they're interested in doing, what their ultimate goal is. And a lot of times, I can talk about things like we're talking about here, it's free resources, recommendations if you're putting together a portfolio, things that you can do to help you get a leg up in the industry, or at least, kind of get a foot in the door.
Sure.
That's a great point. Taylor, what about you? Have you done any of those like really cold LinkedIn outreach kind of things, or have you always had an entry point, or have people reached out to you through LinkedIn to kind of get advice?
Never advice. I've had people reach out to see if I wanted to team up with games, but I unfortunately didn't have the time at the time. But if someone was reaching out to me, I guess the information I'd want to know is just like introduce themselves, what are they interested in, and what questions they have, and yeah, what their goal is. So just so that I can help them in the way they need to be assisted. And it's always really flattering if someone does reach out, um, because they're seeking advice from you. And yeah, I'm sure that everyone is always super accommodating in this industry. Everyone's very nice, and we don't bite. So if anyone were to have questions, I would just say go for it, and just introduce yourself and what you're interested in. And yeah.
Okay, so our kids are looking at, their schedule for next year. They're trying to decide on some subjects where they're going to spend extra time in the books, or, maybe some extracurricular activities to kind of prepare themselves. What school subjects should people really focus on while they're in high school or junior high to kind of better prepare themselves?
Sure.
Hey, you want to talk about this? Some of the things that you did in high school, especially, that kind of got you on the path?
Sure. So I was lucky enough to, right as I was going into my junior year of high school, my high school added what's called an IB computer science class. It's similar to AP, but my school was switching over from AP to IB, International Baccalaureate. It's similar, pretty much just about the same thing. And so taking that computer science class was super helpful. It was a 2-year class, and it taught me the basics of a computer, like how a computer works, which helped with understanding. Programming is basically telling the computer what you want it to do. It's talking to the computer in a way that it can understand. And that was really helpful to know the backstory behind how a computer works, and then learning programming, which is how to communicate with the computer and get it to do what you want it to do. So I would absolutely say, if it's possible to take a computer science class, that will really help you, especially if you want to go more into it, if you want to go to college, for example, for this sort of thing. Having that knowledge prior to college will definitely help when you start. It's not a necessity if you are just going into college and you want to go into this. There's no downside to not having done that, other than just to know a little bit more when you start. But the sooner to start, the better. There's no downside to starting later on, though. And
Wasn't there something you did that was like competitions?
robotics.
Well,
I never.
robotics, but there was I'm sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
Cyber Patriots.
Yeah,
So I
that's what I was
helped
thinking of.
start something called Cyber Patriots in my school, which is a computer security club. And you basically compete against other schools to see how secure you can make a computer, and how good you are at, or how well you do in weeding out malware viruses from a computer that you're given. And that was a really good experience as well, because that also taught me how to secure my computer and how to keep my files safe. So if you have a cybersecurity club or class, that would also be something cool to look into as well.
And that's a very big area to go into. I mean, it's a huge growth area, and I think there's going to be a lot of jobs in the future in cybersecurity.
And that's always something good to know, whether you go into the industry or not. How to keep your files safe and how to be able to detect what might be threats to your security in terms of in the digital world.
I love that. Stephen, do you have any other pieces of advice for folks looking at subjects or ways to manage their junior high or high school time to get into a job like this?
I would say a coding course is really useful. Even if you don't go into programming or development, it gives you an understanding of how things work and how things are set up, whether you're doing it yourself or not. I wouldn't worry too much about what language it is you're taking. It's really transferable. Once you learn one computer language, what you've learned there you can apply to just about every other computer language. I mean, there are some that are fairly different. There are things that make it a little different, but once you learn loops and branches and the basic structure of computer programming, you can apply that to just about anything. I mean, when
it's
I
really
started,
the concepts,
yeah,
that are most important. Sorry to cut it.
No, exactly right. I started with assembly language, which is one step above binary. You're programming, we call it on the bare metal, just about, and
Ones and zeros.
it's doing, yeah, it's doing. You're loading registers and shifting registers, and you're doing really low-level stuff. You don't have to do that anymore because computers are powerful enough that you can work in higher-level languages. But when I started, that's what I was working in. I wrote a whole game, NBA Action 95 for the Sega Genesis in 68,000 assembly language. So it's possible to do. It's a challenge, but you could do it. Fortunately, you don't have to do that so much anymore. But my point was that what I learned from that, you can apply to just about any other kind of programming that you're doing. And it's helpful also because you learn what the computer is actually doing, and you can save yourself time when you're writing in higher level languages. You know what that translates down to. But I don't think it's so important which language you pick, just to take a course in coding and to learn about what programming is, and then you can apply it to just about anything else. And also helps you to use a computer, make it a little easier for you to use a computer.
I know we're gonna go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in terms of game design and development specifically, you probably want to start or you probably want to go into C#. Would you agree, Dad?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
C Sharp, C++, one of those is probably the best if you're going to be doing game design or game development.
I was just thinking
So
C# because that's what
we went from no language recommendation, then Taylor usurped and said no. C#.
Well, if you want to learn programming concepts in general, those translate to just about anyone. So it really doesn't matter. But if you want to specifically get into game design development, specifically using Unity, one of the programs that we suggested, it uses C#. So that's probably what I would recommend, but he's right in saying that if you learn one programming language, it can just about translate to any other one, and it wouldn't be very difficult to pick up another one.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing we're running out, but I have a few more questions if you guys are okay with it.
Sure, please.
Can you talk to me about the creative process? So, game design and when you're first working on a project, how does the creative process play into it, and what does it look like for you specifically? Let's start with Stephen.
Actually, that's probably a better question for Taylor because she's the game designer. I'm more of the implementer.
All right, I still want to pin you down on it because I think the creative process is probably still important on that, but I'm going to go with Taylor first just because you asked for it.
Sure. So, for example, when I was creating, I'll use my Truth or Dare app, for example. So when you're first creating a game from scratch, if you're creating a game from scratch, when it's just you, it's probably going to be a much smaller scale game. And what you want to do is pin down exactly what you want your game to do, what you want the experience to be like, and then you shape everything else around how to communicate that experience to the player, how to get that experience to the player, essentially. And you can do that through how the player interacts with the game, what the game does, how the game does it. For example, you can give games certain feels by through the music, for example, or through the art. if you want a game to be whimsical, you can make it very like bubbly and bright colors. But if you want a game to be very solemn, you can make it very desaturated in the colors. So it's all through small design details to convey what kind of experience you want to the player. And I think that's the biggest thing, just honing in on what kind of thing you want the player to experience, and then you design everything else around that. And some things might change, like throughout the whole process of designing and developing a game, there's many iterations of that game, and the idea for the game might change throughout the process, and that's very common, but that's also okay. That's to make the best kind of game that you want, or the best kind of game that you can.
That's great. So Stephen, from your standpoint, a different point in the game design, right? So you're doing the programming side. How does creative process come into that? Or do you see it as being completely separate for what you do?
No, absolutely. There's a creative aspect. When you're coding, you need to come up with a way of doing, I mean, there's a million ways to solve any coding problem. Most of them are complex and involved and maybe slow and take a lot of memory. The best ones are going to be concise. They're going to be fast. And you need to be creative in order to come up with the best solutions for solving some of these problems. Some games that you're playing wouldn't work if they didn't come up with some technology that allowed rendering of these amazing vistas and you know, scenery and everything else while you're playing the great game in the foreground. It would be a whole different game. So you really need to be creative in terms of coding well, being efficient, making it fun to play. If the game halts every couple of frames, it's really not that much fun to play. So you need to be good at what you do, hone your craft, no shortcuts, no ways, and you get that through experience, ways to make things faster and smaller and more efficient. So from a programming point of view, that's really important. There's also the user interface, which is critical in terms of playing the game. If you have to keep hitting the same button over and over again just to get something to happen, it can be frustrating. You don't want to be doing that. A guy I used to work for, a designer, used to call that monkey features, where a monkey could sit there and just keep hitting that button. That's not really what the game is about. You want to, oh, you're muted, Jeremy.
Just trying to make a joke that those are the games I like. You know,
oh, no.
You know, like, oh yeah, it's like a slot machine kind of deal.
It's not always a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing, but to have to do it all the time, it can be tiresome.
When it's not the purpose of the game,
Right.
It takes away from it usually. Yeah.
Yeah, so in that respect, you know, you definitely need to be creative. And there are times it's really interesting a lot of times when I'm away from work and not necessarily thinking about something in the front of my consciousness, all of a sudden it'll pop into my head, hey, here's a different way of approaching that problem. I'm sure everybody's had that kind of experience, but then you get excited and I'll come back to my computer and I'll sit down and I'll think, okay, let me try this. And a lot of times that's where some of my best ideas come from, where it's just sort of in the background and I'm able to come up with something. So it's neat when that happens.
This is fascinating. I know I'm running a little long on your guys' time. I have two more questions for you, and then we'll wrap up. I'm going to give you the last question first, just to have something to think about, and then I'm going to go back. The last question I'm going to ask you is 3 things you think people should take away from this. It may be things you've already talked about, or just in the sense of the title. Where you know, like, how does someone get a job? I'd love to lead in with that, but before that, you know, like, think about 2 things at once. That's the way my brain works. Let's talk about failure or obstacles. When in your game development have you run into a failure or an obstacle that led to an innovation with a process? I'm thinking about this specifically with some of the obstacles that people are facing with COVID right now and all that. You don't have to frame it that way, but I'd love to learn from you times that failure or obstacles have led to innovation.
Sure. So
Hey, I'll let you start. I need a minute to think about it.
I know, I was thinking too. Wait. So which question would you like first?
You know, like, why not just ask them all? No, let's start with the failure or obstacle question.
Sure. So especially in school, in group projects, there is a lot of opportunities for both success and failure. But for example, if you're in a group project, I'm sure everyone has experienced this at one point. It's a kind of a running joke, where you're in a group project and someone doesn't like carry their weight in the project, for example. In terms of school, I haven't experienced that in a professional setting, but in terms of school, then if someone's not carrying their weight, that really helps in terms of leadership. So when somebody is not carrying their weight, other people have to step up, and it teaches a lot of good lessons in managing people in terms of leadership, redistribution of work, and it a lot of times has allowed me to learn things outside of what I was originally learning. So if, for example, someone is an artist and they aren't doing all the art that they said they wanted to do, then that work gets redistributed, and I was able to do some of the art, and that taught me a lot of things about art. So there's a lot of opportunities to turn negatives into positives in this industry. And for example, was one way that I was able to learn more through school.
I love it. You're the example of people not doing stuff. I had to learn it. And so now I can do a lot of things.
Yeah, so now I can do it.
That's great. Stephen, what about you?
Yeah, I'll go back to my example of, having a game that I wanted to play and didn't have somebody else to play against. That was kind of an obstacle. And it led me to programming. And I thought that was a great example of solving that problem and doing it in a creative way and learning programming along the way. Another thing I just hadn't thought about in many years, but I just thought about, when I was younger, I was trying out to be a lifeguard on the beach. And we didn't have walkie-talkies, we used flags. So we actually used semaphore to speak back and forth between the stands, which were a couple of 100 yards apart. And I needed to learn semaphore in order to get this job. So what I did was, on the computer system that I was using at the University of Delaware, I came up with, I wrote a program that showed a little guy with flags, and I would type in a sentence and he would signal that sentence to me. And then I generated a database of words, and it would randomly pick a word and send it. And that's how I learned how to read semaphore.
That's really cool.
So it was really helpful for me to get that job. And I guarded on that beach for 5 years after that.
That's what development's all about.
Yeah.
And I love it.
So I'd say there's a couple of good examples.
That's fascinating. I love it. All right, now the tough question. I led it to you before, but let's leave folks with 3 takeaways. Like this sense of how do you get a job in the industry, working in the gaming industry. So I'm gonna force Taylor to answer this first. What are your three? What are your 3 takeaways that you think people should be thinking about?
There is a role for just about everyone in this industry. If you're passionate about something, there's probably a way you can turn it into something in the game design development industry and find a job within that. And there's always, I would say that obstacles are opportunities. Like the question we were just having, or the question you just asked. For example, like Dad said, he turned this obstacle he was having into an opportunity for this program that helped him learn. And for me, the Truth or Dare app, where I couldn't find one I liked, and so I created my own. That I just find that really exciting, being able to create whatever you need through having these skills, and just being able to communicate to the computer in a way that the computer understands. And turn it into a tool for yourself and others. And maybe the last one, touching on maybe imposter syndrome. Do you know imposter syndrome? You feel
I do. Go ahead. I don't know if everyone does, so tell people.
A lot of times being or getting into a new industry or something like that can feel very intimidating, and maybe like you don't know enough to be in that setting, or you don't deserve to be in that setting, or what, something along those lines. But I'm sure everyone is feeling that way, and there's always opportunities to learn more. Everyone is always learning. Just because someone might know a little more than you doesn't mean that you don't deserve to be there, and you're just always constantly learning. So I would just say, keep on learning. Don't ever let yourself hold you back from what you want to do. And just keep on keeping on.
Taylor, those are great. I think we got some bonuses in there. Stephen, what about you?
Three things. Let's see. I would say it's really great time to be interested in this.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day when I started, I was lucky because my father, as I said, worked at the university, which gave me access to these mainframes that almost nobody had access to at the time. So I had an opportunity, and it was something I enjoyed, and I followed through on that. But today, if you have a personal computer, there's all these utilities, assets, things that you can download, tools to learn development and do it for free. So if you have a PC, you can do all of these things. They're out there, they're available. You can try them, see what you like. And that leads into my second point is, follow what it is that you love. Don't be afraid to try different things. Try programming. If programming isn't for you, try graphics. If graphics aren't for you, you could do 3D modeling, or 2D graphics, do 3D modeling. Maybe it's music. You could score a soundtrack for a game. There's so many different things you can do. You could manage the team as a producer. And that's a challenging job as well. You have to kind of understand all the different parts, but there's so many directions you can go in the game industry. Don't be afraid to try different things. You may land on something you never thought you would, but just try different things, find out what you love. And the third thing I'd say is put together a portfolio. Like Taylor had mentioned, she did a game for the App Store for Apple, which you can do. It does require a developer account, which costs $100 a year. So there's a bit of an expense there through Apple, yeah. But it's something you can do. If it's something you enjoy and you feel strongly about, that's not a huge, it's expensive, but it's probably something that could be managed, and you could put something on the App Store, and that looks really good when you're interviewing for a job. You can put, any of the graphics that you've done, examples like a Minecraft server, something like all of these things you can put together, and it looks really good when you're interviewing. So those are just some ideas for getting started in the game industry, and now's a great time to be doing it.
Yeah.
I love it. This has been great. Taylor, before you go,
Sure.
What is your dad's gaming superpower?
Oh, he is so good at different aspects of games that I played. Oh, I would say probably his ability to problem solve.
Okay.
And that bleeds into many different aspects of his life. For example, development, as well as what he was saying. That's all about. That's what development is all about, is problem solving. So, like he said, the puzzle game he's talking about. He's amazing at those. He's so good at thinking outside the box.
Stephen, what is your daughter's gaming superpower?
Well, she's great on so many things. Design, I think one of the great things about Taylor is she can cross the divide between the technical coding side and the design side, and her interpersonal communication skills are really good. Sometimes you don't get all of that in one person, so it's a little bit rare, and I think that's going to really carry her far in her career, which is going to be really good. And also, she's a great shot on games. I'll sit there and I'll just miss people constantly. She's like, give me the controller. And she just takes people out all over the place. So she's got a lot of different really good skills.
Thank you.
What I love about gaming is that it's fun. There's a joy, there's exploration that happens. And I think that was what was fun about today. I think we had a lot of fun. There was some exploration going on. Really appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I would like to remind everyone you can send questions to questions@nyhemophilia.org. We'll try to get you answers. We'll put them up on our website. But thank you all. I'm going to hit stop now.